Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm finally having a chance to do the rear brake upgrade on my E90 330i. So currently the car has 336mm discs with single piston calipers, and it has shallow hub, 66mm height with a large handbrake, which is usually the case on most 6-cylinder 3 Series cars of E9X platform. So what we've got here is the f80, f30, f3x, f2x rear calipers, the 44mm piston version, so that's how you can tell which size pistons they have. Eccentric bushings with some new bolts, Hell Performance braided lines, some new C-clips. You'll see what this is for slightly later in the video, but chances are if you have a seized union on the brake pipe, you will destroy this clip, and it's always nice to have a replacement. And some E60 discs. So these here are 345mm by 24mm thick, large handbrake cavity, 185mm and 63mm height. So that's the textile part number, and those are the dimensions for them. I've had them grooved in the same pattern as the front discs, which I've already installed, and they should look quite well once they're on the car. I've also got a set of amp pads. They're slightly used but still in decent condition, so I'll be installing them, and they're also made by Textar in the BMW M compound, which is exclusive to BMW dealers only. So aftermarket Textar pads will not be of the same compound as these pads here. So first things first, I'm going to check the bleed nipples, the bleed valves, whether I can operate them and open them. I'm going to disassemble the old brake pads because they're pretty much done in here. Push the pistons back, clean the caliper up, install the eccentric bushings. So we'll punch these out, pop these in, and then I'll get on to dismantling what's on the car. Jack the car up, pull the wheel off, pull the caliper off, pull the disc off. We'll release the handbrake and lock the adjusting pin to release it completely, just so we can adjust it properly, and go from there. Then we'll probably test fit the discs to see where the backing plates need trimming, and we'll test fit the caliper to see again where the back plate needs trimming around the caliper. We'll do a bit of trimming, and then we should be able to get on to assembly. Right, so that's calipers all checked. When checking the bleed valves, I always recommend using a ring spanner, 11mm. The longer the better, and the straighter the better. So you are applying all of the force into rotating the actual bleed valve. The issue with using a socket on the ratchet, or even a deep socket on the ratchet, is that it's very difficult to get the right angle, and a lot of the time you're introducing a bending moment, and that can actually cause the bleed valve to snap when you're trying to undo it. So in my experience, using a ring spanner with a long handle is always your best chance of actually getting these undone without snapping them. Also, when they are seized, when they're very tight on there and you sort of apply a little bit of pressure and it doesn't go, another thing that can free them up is by tapping it in this direction, just to release all the corrosion that's built up in between the threads within the actual bore in the caliper. And if that still doesn't work, you can try tapping it around here, and then gently keep applying pressure, and it should 9 times out of 10 undo. In a very rare occasion it will actually snap, and then you'll have to drill it out. Additionally, once you've undone it, once you've sort of managed to break it loose, and you'll probably have an irresistible urge of replacing the valve itself with a brand new shiny one. I highly recommend against it if it's still quite tight coming up, because what happens is you get burrs built up on the thread, on the actual bleed valve, and that burr will actually damage the thread in the bore of the caliper, because the caliper is aluminium and the bleed valve is steel. So you'll actually rip the threads out, and then you won't be able to install the new bleed valve into the old bore, because all the threads are going to be damaged. So you'll have to rethread it or helicoil it or time sert it. So if you do manage to undo the valve and it is quite tight after you sort of manage to turn it about 90 degrees like this one is, so it works but then it's still quite tight, that means there's debris on the thread. So do not go any further, just leave it as it is, because this is sufficient for it to move and to work and for you to bleed the system, and yet you won't have to repair the caliper. So now that's all done, the inserts are in, the hardware is cleaned up, the retaining springs and pins. I can move on to dismantling the car. Right, so now what needs to happen is we need to release the handbrake, and we need to release the handbrake mechanism in order to be able to adjust it properly. Well, that comes off, but what you've got is this mechanism here, and what you need is a long flat screwdriver like this to then be able to latch that mechanism onto a little hook that is within the actual mechanism. So I'm going to try and film it the best I can. Perhaps from this side. Press on there, and you've got to sort of push it inside. You have to make sure that the handbrake itself, the handbrake handle, is all the way down. Then you push it inside until the latch is on, just like that. I think you can just about see the latch that's latched onto the mechanism. So now that's the handbrake fully released on the lever side. We can go and remove the brake disc and carry on with the installation. Right, so now the old disc is off. To get the old disc off, what you need to do is, if it's seized on the hub, you've got to impact it with a hammer around this area here. God forbid, do not hit it on the contact patch on the outside or on the inside. Just hit it here and eventually it will free up, and then you can remove it. In the rare occasion that you have an issue with the handbrake not releasing enough for you to remove the disc, that's usually due to the fact that there's a lip built up here. So what you have to do is you have to find this adjuster here, and you have to wind it all the way in, and then that will reduce the size of the handbrake shoes to the minimum, and you'll be able to take the disc off. But first you need to free it off the hub, and in order to do that, hit it in the center here with a big hammer. If it doesn't work, get a bigger hammer. Now I've just test fitted the new disc, and we have an issue where this edge is actually catching the backing plate to the handbrake. So this bit here, and you can see that shiny mark there, that's where it's actually catching, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to get an angle grinder, and we're going to trim all of this excess material of the backing plate that protrudes above the handbrake shoes, and we're going to do that all the way around to make sure that there's no touch condition with the new discs. And additionally, we're going to trim the edges of this backing plate here, where the caliper is going to sit, because the caliper is substantially larger. I think we're going to avoid trimming this bit here, because even though the mounting points of the caliper, of the new caliper, are actually slightly thicker, we can actually bend these a little bit to avoid cutting them completely. And let's just have a look at the two discs in comparison. As you can see, diameter wise, 336 and 345, it's not really that much of a difference. But the great benefit comes from the fact that the disc is two-piece and that it's significantly thicker. And of course that you're getting a two-piston brembo caliper instead of the old single-piston cast iron caliper. Right, so that's all trimmed. The disc seems to spin freely. That's how much of the heat shield I've taken off to accommodate the caliper. I didn't bother removing any material here. It took some bending, especially the lower mounting point, to actually get the caliper mounting attachment points to slot into the gap. And once you've done that, obviously this edge of the heat shield has been pushed in. So what you've got to do is push it back out just to ensure that it's not hitting on the disc. So if you just do that, once the caliper is fitted, I always recommend fitting the caliper before you fit the disc, just to make sure that everything is adjusted correctly and there's plenty of room for it to fit, and you can bolt it on. And then once you fit the disc, you can bolt on the caliper and be sure that it's got somewhere to sit and it's going to fit nice and well. Right, so now I've got to pop the disc back on, bolt on the caliper properly, check that nothing is catching again, and adjust the handbrake, and then I'll move on to connecting the hydraulic lines. Now with connecting the hydraulic lines, I had a look at this union here, and for some reason it doesn't give me any confidence that that's going to undo. But I might be wrong, like I was in my last video, so let's see. Right, and now onto the fun part of trying to undo this union. So let's see. Am I lucky? You see that's seized. So I've managed to crack the joint, but as I'm twisting the union, it's seized solid on the pipe. So what I'm going to do now is try and flatten this clip, this C-clip, and then I'll unwind the caliper off of here. And there we go. So the reason why we flattened this clip is because the OEM brake hoses, they've got anti-rotation teeth in here that sit inside the matching teeth in this bracket on the subframe, and we aren't able to spin it if it's all the way up in its socket in there. So we flatten the clip and we pull it through, and then we can just unwind it by unwinding the caliper. And with our Hell Performance lines, because they have rotating unions, we can just wind them on and tighten them where we need to without having to spin the hose or bend the pipe or break it. Right, so luckily I've got some new clips. I could reuse that one, I could sort of bend it back into shape, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to use a brand new one. I'm going to clean up the pipe here. Bracket. Just make sure there's no debris on the tip, because that has to sit nice and flush inside the hose union. Now I'm going to get the 14mm and remove the old hose off of the caliper. Using the spanner. Right, so that's the old hose. Whenever working with any threaded joint, especially with brakes, just make sure the threads are nice and clean all the time. Make sure that everything is nice and clean. There's no debris on the threads, there's no debris on the mating surfaces, and make sure that whenever you're putting anything in, whenever you're assembling any joint, it's nice and square and you're not cross-threading it. So always try and get a few turns in by hand and make sure it's not getting any tighter as you're going along, and just have a general feel for the joint and what the joint's doing. Now, when tightening the brake hose, it's best to tighten it, come off, tighten it, come off a couple of times. So, in this case, tighten it, come off a little bit, tighten it again, loosen, and then tighten it again for the third time. And that's that. So, our rotating unions, you can now just pop it through this hole in the bracket and assemble it. Do it by hand as much as you can because access here is fairly limited. And the further you go, the quicker you can actually get the joint tightened up. It's a 17mm drive, same as OEM, so use a 17mm spanner. And for the final part, it just needs a nip. And that's it. Then you can wipe all the excess brake fluid off. Better still, wash it with some brake cleaner if you have any, or some water. And there you have it. That's the installation complete. So now I'll adjust the handbrake, pop the pads in, bleed the hydraulics, and this side will be done. Right, so now onto adjusting the handbrake. It's released from the lever. What we're going to do is switch on the torch and see where the adjuster is. Then we're going to lock it fully. We're going to fully extend the adjuster so the handbrake shoes are locked against the disc, and then we're going to back it off 6 or 7 times. So now we're locking it by spinning the adjuster. That's tight and locked. Can it go anymore? Let's see. No, that's it. And now I'll back it off. I think 7 clicks, ideally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Done. That's the handbrake adjusted. Now onto the pads and hydraulics. Right, now onto the pad wear sensor. The original one fits just fine. It hasn't been damaged, so we're just going to keep it as it is. Make sure you've got this retaining clip. Slots in there, and it will just slot into the little slot in the pad. So, like that. There it is, that's it. And then this little section here will just clip onto the little cap for the bleed valve, like that. But first, we need to bleed the system, so let's do that. Right, that should do it. I waited until it ran clear. This is how much fluid I took out. I did see the shade of the fluid change to the lighter one eventually. There were no bubbles coming out, so I'm confident there's no air left in the system and it's all bled properly. Okay, so that's the other side done, and all we have left to do is release the handbrake, and we can do that by just releasing this latch here. There we go, and then it will auto adjust. Pop this back on, and that's it. And as always, thanks again for watching. Hopefully you found this useful, and if you have any questions, please drop me a message. Till the next one.